All right. Hi there. I saw on X the other day someone saying that there's no housing shortage, that we've got the most number of housing units per population ever. That this is just made up. So uh, I just kind of wanted to go in on where this number comes from, how a housing shortage is calculated. First thing you can do is just look at supply and demand, just from a common sense standpoint. If you're looking for a home for sale, you start competing against other people, bidding wars, that kind of thing. You look at market times, how quickly the home sells. And then if you're going to try to rent an apartment, you're going to notice that you might be competing for the apartment. Like vacancy rates are super low. So that's kind of the common sense approach, but that's not enough for anyone to wager a fair amount of investment into, right? I mean, some can. And then like urban planners, cities, projecting out how many housing units they might need as they kind of develop infrastructure. So they need a little more accurate historical perspective on formulas on how to calculate this. And there's no proven method, right? It's just kind of the general rule of thumb on how they get there. But let's kind of first start where this whole thing triggered from. And this, when you look at this logically, intuitively seems to make sense, right? So you have the most housing per capita in history. So what this is it's a Fred graph, St. Louis Federal Reserve database, housing inventory estimate, total housing units in the United States divided by population. Okay, so this looks, well, that's common sense. For every person, you need a housing unit. Um, so one thing is let's just kind of be real smart ass here is how many of these homeless camps are those tents counted in the housing units, right? I mean, if you got a homeless camp of 150 tents, is that counted into this housing data? Um, so just because you have the population doesn't necessarily mean they're going to afford housing and move into housing. So that's one fallacy on this and why that metric can't be used. The other metric is probably a little more accurate would be households. So if we want to look at households, and hang on, let me try to do this one. Share. Here we go. Okay, so now I pulled this data from the same resource. Very similar stuff, right? It's a housing inventory estimate. So same data there. And then I use the household estimates instead of the population. And what do you notice here? We go back to 1999 on this. You'll notice that there was a big adjustment made. This was on households on how they calculated on the American Community Survey. So that's why that big drop there. So this is a new methodology. So really, we can only look at 2002 forward. And you'll see the blue line is our households, or I'm sorry, our housing units, and the red is our households. And look at how tight that margin gets, right? I mean, it just continues to keep getting closer and closer. So there's a couple things driving this. One is population growth. You talk about illegal immigration coming in, taking that up. They are counted in the community survey. So that is one, and the other is relationships. You don't stand in these long-term relationships anymore. The younger buyers are usually not getting married and buying together. They're usually buying independent. The divorces, that adds to different households. So the household size is shrinking. And then there's just more demand for housing. So that's what we're seeing here as far as households and housing units. So that demand is getting closer, and it's the same data. It's just not looking at population. We're looking at households. So it's everything's perspective. So this isn't the way that the professionals, the cities, the urban planners, or even like the developers, the builders, how they look at things. And they don't throw darts at a dartboard and guessing, yeah, I'm going to throw $10 million into this development project and hope it works. You think that that might happen in the boardroom. Maybe it does. But they do have some sort of methodology. And that's kind of what I'll get into. So where do I go from here? Um, let's add this one. So when we go back to how a city or how like a builder, how someone will identify that, they use a formula and they usually calculate it. It doesn't seem intuitive, but they calculate it on jobs per housing unit. And why do they do that? One is population doesn't work because of the homeless camp, right? You need a job to be able to buy a house or to rent an apartment. So where there's growth in industry jobs, population will follow that. So like in Detroit, the auto boom came in and they built up all these car factories, and all these people moved in to work at the car factories, and then all the people working at car factories needed restaurants, needed grocery stores, needed entertainment. All the other industries started coming in to build around that, which created more jobs. So it was a compounding effect. Well, then, kind of in the 70s and 80s, the manufacturing base started getting hollowed out, and we were buying more foreign autos. So, and then all these manufacturing plants started moving over to Mexico, and assembly plants moving out where, and that job base in Detroit fell apart. So the jobs per housing unit tracked through that. So it's how a city wants to plan for proper growth, and if it's not growing, on how to reduce that. So they want to allow a certain amount of housing units to be built and not oversupply. They don't want urban sprawl, but they don't want too much supply. And now you have kind of these bureaucrats in charge of it, which creates other problems. But I won't address that. I'm just going to explain where these numbers come from on how this housing shortage is determined, and not like this conspiracy myth or lie put out on the internet. So going back to 1960, that was definitely a huge expansion in the U.S. So there were lots of jobs growing. We were the only industrialized country standing after the war, and we were still booming. 1.4 jobs, 1.4 jobs per housing unit. So for every job, there was basically just over a house. And then in 1970, it was still kind of tight. And this is nationally. So where are we at? 2010, we started seeing these low supplies. Uh, that's going to drive house prices up. So this is nationally. Now you have things like California where you have artificial supply choked off. You have regions that you can't add to because of geographic, maybe, I don't know Denver that well, but maybe you're surrounded by mountains and you can't keep growing, that kind of stuff. So I'm going to look at my local market here. This is a little easier. And when I started in the business, I started in, let's see, early 1990s, like 92, 93 is when I got licensed, and we were like one of the most affordable markets in the country, and we were about 1.4 jobs per housing unit. To give you an idea, I could buy a two-bedroom starter home, two-bedroom, one bath, built in the 1920s, for $47,000, 50,000. Maybe it was 55. I got a deal. That was because we had a lot of houses, or a lot of jobs per house. So there was a lot of um, supply. And as we kind of go forward, we'll notice that supply drop, and then we'll see the demand pick up as well. So the latest one is 1.32 jobs per housing unit. And then you got a question on what the jobs are too. So if you've got a bunch of flipping burgers jobs, not making much money, it's going to depend on what kind of housing unit you can afford. You probably can't afford the McMansion if you're at McDonald's, unless you own the McDonald's franchise, that kind of thing. So then you also have to break down with what is needed for the housing unit. Um, let's see, housing estimate. I have more data here. I'm getting buried in my charts here. Bear with me. I've used those. Here we go. I am going to remove that, and I'm going to add something else. Huh. And this is not working. Removed from stage. Here we go, I think. Share screen. Technology is a really awesome thing. Okay. So I had to switch over to Google Chrome, which isn't my main browser. So that was the difficulty here. So if you go to nar.realtor research and statistics, they have a housing shortage tracker on their website. And this is updated March 2025. So rather than calculating it out like I did, they use the whole thing. So they base this on a historical average of one permit is issued for every 2 new jobs. So what they're trying to do is figure out where their supply is short and where builders might be able to build inventory. And the builders calculate this in-house as well. So if we go to my market and what did I just do? Holy smokes. There's a new single permit is issued for every 3 new jobs. So now they indicate that as need for more permits. Okay, this is just kind of the basic information. If you go up to Fargo, there's sufficient supply. A new single family permit is issued for every 2 new jobs. And then I can toggle this with multifamily as well. You go to Chicago, a new single permit is issued for every 5 new jobs. So Chicago is definitely in a housing shortage. You go to the red and you have Miami, Fort Lauderdale. There's this new single permit issued for every 13 jobs. You get into New York City, a new permit issued for every 14 new jobs. The real thing that we're hearing on there's no housing shortage is coming from these areas that boomed and then they're in the bust. It was that 2020 COVID, everybody moved out. Rates were low. They could work from home. So why not work from somewhere sunny and warm? And they moved down to the Sun Belt here. And these markets got overbuilt, overinvested. And then that demand shifted as they're called back to work. And you'll see where the supply is low. It's going back to the Northeast where all these people went down here. And that's my theory. I'm waiting for some additional data to prove that theory. So that's kind of what I wanted to share. It's there's a lot of people saying that this stuff is going to spread throughout the country. It may. I don't think so. Jobs, as long as economic activity goes, you can see that they base housing off of jobs. You need a job to pay for a house. Otherwise, you're going to be living in a homeless camp. If that wasn't the case, then they would add these tents to the housing inventory. Sarcasm there. So, all right. So going into the questions here, I'll remove this. All right. So thinking time, greetings from Chicago. Hey, how are you? Covered in Chicago. That market is tight. Holy smoke. Someone sent me a message on that, and I couldn't believe how tight that market was for inventory. So I hope you're not trying to buy a house right now there. Robert, good evening. And then out of curiosity, how many homes are dilapidated, defunct? Oh, that's a good question. How many homes are dilapidated, defunct, teardowns, such as in old Rust Belt towns like Detroit or Baltimore? Great question. I don't have that data, but that is a spot on. So there's another group on X that kind of gets my goat a little bit. I got into real estate at a young age. My brother went off to college and got his master's in architecture. So he became this urban planner, this, his vision, and these people post it all on X, and they'll show a picture of beautiful Rome where you can walk down these little streets and it's not built around the automobile. And then they'll show a picture of a congested area of highways and traffic. And they'll say, this is why we need urban planning. And it's like, no, you built that thing way back before any technology. It's just you get outside of Rome and it's more of a metro area, but the downtown is still quaint. And, those areas are cool. So the argument I had with the architects when I hung around them, and I sold a lot of houses to them, we never really agreed on this stuff. But they believe that we were going to hit this population decline and we would have to tear down housing. So they wanted to see urban planning. They were really against urban sprawl, even though they really didn't understand it. It was just kind of what they were taught. In urban sprawl is the suburbia keep growing out and out, these cities getting bigger and bigger. And so they think that's a bad thing. Okay, so you just chew up all the farmland and blah, 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 rainwater. We should be living in high rise towers and, taking just the train. They love trains. I don't know why they love trains, but they love trains. And, you don't need the car. So that's what they want. And that's kind of that urban planning. And that's kind of what our region in the Twin Cities does is they try to limit how much growth can go out. So they limit the supply of new homes coming to the market. But what's happening is as these old infrastructures, as the city declines, you have these dilapidated homes and they're defunct and they don't last forever. So the IRS allows you to depreciate a home over 27 and a half years. And it's not to give people free money. It is because a house has a life cycle. You can't depreciate the land. The land's going to be there, but the house building structure is going to fall apart over time. You get into a 100-year-old house and you got some big problems. You're spending some big money to try to keep it going. Can they last longer? Yeah, but you got built-in obsolescence, you got other issues, and then you have neglect. I know Detroit took down huge swaths of blocks of housing. Minneapolis did that too. They took down all the old warehouse district and they leveled that in the 60s because they wanted to build a new city in the area. And it didn't happen until probably the late 90s before they rebuilt all that into housing. But it took that long after they tore that down. So the cities do go through that growth cycle, and that's a challenge. I don't have the direct answer on how to do it, and I don't know how to calculate how much of our housing supply. I suppose we might be able to look up on local data on year built of the houses and then try to make some estimates that way. I would think each city kind of has a good idea of their inventory, but from a mass perspective, I don't know how to dig into it. So Northwest Oklahoma has, how do I remove this now? Northwest Oklahoma has a lot of properties with roof and window damage due to storms on 40-year-old homes and need electrical work or asbestos cleanup. Yeah, 40 years isn't too bad. That's not that old of home. Those were well-built homes, pretty standardized construction. But you're right. Storm damage, windows don't last forever. You have to replace those. You have to keep, siding has to be replaced after like 20 years. Roofs, they say, yeah, you can buy a 20-year shingle, which will be gone in 12, that kind of thing. So that stuff is part of the maintenance that needs to be done on homes. Asbestos is a great product. The poor asbestos, just when it gets airborne, it can be real problematic. But it's a great insulating product. As long as you can keep it where it's encapsulated and doesn't get airborne, I wouldn't touch it. It's a great product otherwise. And then Matrix, the real answer is no, there is no housing shortage. We have nationwide epidemic of price fixing, market manipulation, and unreasonable standards enacted by owners and investment organizations. Yes and no. So you're right. And I just addressed it. We have government agencies that limit the supply of growth we can do. And it's put together by the green movement, right? They don't want urban sprawl. They don't want farmland chewed up. They want to see everyone taking a train and everyone living in high rises. That is constraining the supply of homes in most markets, certainly the market I'm in. As far as unreasonable standards, I 100% agree. The building codes are no longer about safety. Somewhere along the line, manufacturers, businesses figured out how they can get their product put into the building code so they can sell more product. So now we're adding $20,000 in cost for a problem that really didn't exist. So that's driving the price of housing up. So those standards and regulations, price fixing, I'm not sure what you mean about that. It's kind of the cost is the cost. I built housing. it can be pretty brutal if you're on the builder end. You can take a big loss in a real hurry. Market manipulations done at kind of the government level by the zoning, what I had talked about. And then I don't know by owners and investment organizations. If you're a private owner, what you do with your property should be your decision to do. No one's got a corner on the market. The more rules we make, the more we kind of make that as a monopoly. Every time we pass a new rule, it's just kind of some wealthy person gets the upper hand. So, and then Robert, houses might be worth 85,000 in the local market, but need 110,000 in electrical upgrades, plumbing, and HVAC. Back to building codes. So, not too long ago, like I think it was 5 years ago, I could replace an electrical panel box for under $2,000, right? So if you had like a Federal Pacific box and you wanted insurance was going to make you upgrade it to say Square D or Siemens box, that might be under $2,000, just under $2,000. Today, I'm over $5,000 to do the same thing, and most of it's the new electrical code. It's the new arc fault breakers. It's once you start touching it, you got to start running new leads. And then you got the external shutoff. You get into a mess, and the costs explode exponentially. And you're right, the costs get astronomical on these rehabs. I do a lot of the work myself because my background was as a builder. So I'm not afraid of most of this work. I've got friends in the trades that can help me with like the electrical and plumbing, and we trade off work to help each other out. Plumbing can get expensive. HVAC can get very expensive too. So you got to learn ways to work around that if you're investing. But to the average person, absolutely, you can blow through 110 in a heartbeat on a house. Had a guy trying to renovate a place to a bed and breakfast and bought the place for $10,000 plus $35,000 in back taxes. Oh, wow. $45,000 into it. And after 6 months, he defaulted to the bank because it would take $200,000 to recode it. Absolutely. That's not uncommon. City of Minneapolis, years ago, they had a program called Buy a House for a Buck. Well, it ain't worth a buck. This is, once you get into that, you got this laundry list of code enforcements of houses to bring back up to level. And then you start doing business with the city like that, then you have a lot more red tape and regulations on it. So yeah, you kind of stay away from that. I don't like those markets. Like if I look at a house, and I've seen people bring these deals to the table and say, wow, I can buy the single family house for $60,000 in this small town, and there's good job growth there, and I can rent it and it's going to make good cash flow. And I'm like, okay, that's great. What happens when a storm comes by, like you said, or you have to replace the roof? And then you got to make another repair. You're upside down on that house because you bought it for 60, it's worth 60. Now you got to put 20,000 into storm damage. Now you're at 80,000. You're not going to get the appreciation to absorb that kind of stuff. So that's the risk on those markets. If you don't mind that, and you just want to take the cash flow and you can kind of get work done pretty cheap there, and the market well, then it's worth it. For me, stepping out of my market to go do that doesn't make sense. So that's where you got to be careful on buying the super cheap properties. It's like you say, Robert, getting into the code enforcement and then getting into a point where your improvements, let's say he put in that 200 plus, let's just say it was 200 even, and he's going to be at 245 all into it. And the value now is worth 150. He just lost 100,000. So that gets to be a challenge on how to fix up. How does a small town get out of that rut, right? The only way to do it is back to what we talked about. It's that job growth. You need people to come in to create the demand, and the demand will bring the prices up so you can fix these properties up where it's financially feasible to do it. But right now, a lot of those towns, the values don't support fixing up the property. And it's a vicious cycle. Detroit was in that vortex for many, many years, and they started bulldozing houses. And one of the lenders, I forget which lender it was, moved their operations into that town. and the town is apparently took on a whole new life now. So they've got a main industry that came back in. It's financial services of some sort. It's a mortgage company or something like that, or a bank. And now these houses are starting to be fixed up, what do they call it? Gentrification or urban renewal or whatever the term is there. I don't know what the term is, but that city's starting to take on a new flavor. But it took jobs to come into that market and turn that around. So that's kind of what I look into if I'm going to be buying something to invest. I'm going to be looking for where are the jobs, where does the job growth happen. So I was in this conversation the other day on the video, and we're into like the southeast region of the United States has built a lot of power plants. So they have a lot of affordable energy, Texas as well. So when you have all these AI coming out, you need these data centers. Where do you build data centers? You need reliable, affordable energy. So those data centers are moving into those markets. And as we reshore some of these factories, which we will, not all of them, but just that's going to happen. Just with tax incentives and tariffs and just the supply chain, just businesses wanting to make sure they're not cut off. A lot of this manufacturing is going to be reshored. Is it going to move back into Detroit? Well, probably the Detroit factory that was operating and humming in the 1950s is not equipped to handle today's standards. So it's probably more cheap or more cost effective to build an assembly plant somewhere else. So, they're going to need affordable energy. So that's where they're going to go. Unfortunately, my market is very focused in on green energy, and the cost of electricity is going through the roof, and natural gas because of those policies put in place. And then there's going to be no job growth because no one is going to move to the high electricity. They need affordable energy to build. So that's something you want to look into if you're investing in different areas. All right, so back to Matrix. As far as price fixing in New York City, there are many buildings that are mostly empty in Manhattan. This is being done by large company that own many buildings. The primary reason for this maneuver is to take advantage of tax breaks. Kind of. New York is a different animal, and I'm not an expert in New York, but I do know New York has some of the toughest rent control in the country. So if you get into an apartment, from my understanding in New York, you get on that list for affordable housing, you get the rent for, you're overlooking whatever, the great area of Manhattan, and you get a 2-bedroom for $1,500 a month because that rent had been locked in. And then that apartment never hits the market again because it's traded to their friend. It's not let hit the market. So the rent control has put it to where these developers cannot renovate the building, and there really is no tax break for losing money. You don't go into business to lose money for the tax break. This is not a good business practice. You do buy real estate for the depreciation, which gives you some passive income losses. But that's the cost of the building depreciating. That's a real cost. As we said, the houses don't last for 100 years. They'll last 30 years, and you depreciate it over 27 and a half years. Yeah, it's a cost of renovating the property. That's happening in St. Paul too. St. Paul passed. It's a follow-up question to that. St. Paul passed some really tight rent control. So the developers have stopped building buildings. They had projects slated and they just pulled out. They backed out of the city. And the ones that are buying to renovate pulled out too. Because you go in and you start fixing up a property, and back to Robert's standpoint, you buy it for $45,000. You buy it from the city for $1, but you have $200,000 in renovation, but you're only going to collect $1,000 in rent because of the rent control. What are you going to do? You're going to walk away from it and let it go back to the city, which is happening in St. Paul, or you just let it sit empty and then hope that it gets so far run down that the city will allow you to tear it down and then you rebuild it, because it doesn't make sense financially to play that game, to work to fix that up and lose money. So there's a lot of things going on there. And if you look at most of that, it's pretty easy to point at the owners, but it's probably the city that is responsible. So an incident that it just happened about 3 weeks ago in St. Paul is one of the office buildings, beautiful, high rise, right? Bank owned it. The owner, had the bank on it and couldn't get the rent, and then threw his hands up and says, "I got to let it go back to the bank." And then the bank says, "No, we don't want to deal with the city's code compliances either." And the bank walked away from it. So now the city's stuck with it. So, the city made their own bed. And now what do? They're going to tax the residents that remain. The wealthy residents have the ability to move out and get out while they can. And then it's a systematic collapse. So since then, this has only been a few weeks, they're talking about removing some of the rent control because they realize they have a problem. And then Robert, does New York City have a ton of rent controlled units? Yes, that's exactly what we talked about. Yep. And then local media, New York City claims about housing shortages, all while you can see entire empty new buildings. Yeah, I don't know New York that well, but I do know they've got heavy rent control, and they have basically they don't have a free system there, a free market system. Most cities don't anymore. Most cities start putting in a lot of regulations that really make it hard to provide housing. Most housing providers are like you and me, and we scrape together what we earn. We buy a couple of units and then we rent it out, and we're on a shoestring budget. Something goes out that hurts you financially, you quick make a repair, and it takes you a lot of months to recoup that from the rent. Renter walks away, doesn't pay the rent. It's coming out of your pocket, right? It's not this magical big business. Most of them are mom and pop. Now there are companies like BlackRock that own thousands of units, but as a total percentage of the housing units, it's not that much. It's like under 2% of the rental units are owned by BlackRock. And then there's some syndications, and the syndications, they look like a big company, but they're really not. They're like investment hedge funds that will say, okay, we're going to invest in this company that's going to build an apartment building, and we'll buy 5 shares in it. So you'll have like maybe a teachers union go buy, with a retirement fund into this apartment building. It's not these individual or this, not person. They're usually, the bigger stuff is done by groups of investors that buy into these portfolios through what they call syndications. So it's not as, I don't know, black and white, good versus evil as the Hollywood movies make you seem to believe. If you look at every Hollywood movie made since 1970, it's been the big bad developer is going to take advantage of this local community, and then the hero comes in and they save the day by shutting down the development. That's been the plot of every movie since 1970. I mean, to some extreme or not, to one level or another. So the owner, the property owner, the investor has been made this enemy in the eyes of the population. But really, what we have is the lack of these investors being able to build housing to keep housing affordable. If you cut all that red tape and you let you, me, and everybody go build and buy, house and fix it up and rent it out, you'd flood the market with inventory, and then prices would crash. And then I'd be like, oh my gosh, mine's not rented. I can't afford not to have it rented. I got to lower my rent. You know, so that's how that plays out. Is supply is the only thing that's going to offset prices. There's other forces that drive the prices. Maybe I can jump to this screen too. Bear with me. I got another chart that really explains what we're dealing. If you want to talk about house prices, this will explain what we're in. Let's try it like this. Present. Here we go. So this is really what house prices, what's happening here. So the blue line, let's start with the red line. The red line is the Case-Shiller Index. That's the National Home Price Index. And this is, well, house prices are getting so damn expensive. And then the green line, that's the M2 money supply. That's the amount of money that's in circulation and printed in the US. And watch the red and the green line as we start coming through the 90s. And then we started entering what was the housing bubble. And then like 2004, what happened? We went to war, right? And we entered this housing bubble here. They started printing a lot of money. And then the house price index, or the M2, I'm sorry, I got that backwards. The M2 continued to gradually go up. We went into a bubble. That's not where they printed the money. I had that backwards. So we hit the bubble here, and then we came back down. The price index came back down because a lot of those went into foreclosure. And now look at the trajectory, the printing of money, and then here COVID, and we skyrocketed. And then we're going through the ups and downs here. But if you want to say the where we should be in healthy is like the early 90s, and we only go back to like 1987. But if we say that the late 80s and early 90s is healthy, that M2 and that house price index should be relatively close. Right now, it's telling me that the home prices have to catch up to that green line. So how do you solve that? Now look at the blue line. The blue line is your real median income. That's household income in the United States. And then that data ends here in 2023. I don't know why it doesn't, but they'll update that. I'll keep watching this chart. But this is the dilemma we ran into. And this is back to, I think, Matrix, you talked about rigging the system. This is kind of where the system gets rigged. It's not the individuals. I mean, maybe at a certain level, there's some Dr. Evil at the head of BlackRock or some company like that cutting a deal with the Federal Reserve, or its politicians doing it with them. And that's probably the more likely scenario. But it is the money printing that the house prices float against. So it's supply, and then the real median income, the workers are getting slaughtered. That's why the house prices are so expensive. It's frustrating. I wish I could fix it. I don't want it this way. So, how do you get house prices down? You start cutting regulations. You start opening up land to be developed. Don't make it so damn expensive. Don't make it $60,000 to pull a permit to build a single family house. Don't make an extra $100,000 in building codes that don't add safety. They just profit businesses. You just shaved a ton of the housing cost off right there. So, let's see, local media claim. Okay. Yeah. So that's it for questions. That's where we're at. I just kind of wanted to address that. There is a housing shortage. Will it last forever? No. Is it ever going to be good? No, it never has been. Right. We go through these cycles. We go up and down. We go to boom, bust, boom, bust, boom, bust, right? There's never a perfect median. It's like your life. You never hit that perfect, happy life and work balance, right? Everything's lollipops and sunshine and rainbows. No, it's, you got busy, and then all of a sudden you got suddenly you don't have work, right? And then you never have that perfect balance. It's the same with the market cycles. So that's all I got. Thanks for jumping on, and thanks for the questions, Robert and Matrix, and thinking time. So we'll catch up, and that's all I got for tonight. Have a good one. Thanks.